Ever had a thought spiral so intense it felt like your brain was stuck on a hamster wheel? You're not alone. Overthinking isn't just annoying, it's a mental trap that fuels stress, drains your energy, and distorts how you see everything. But here's the good news. Your thoughts don't have to control you. Welcome to Holistic Living Mind, the podcast where we explore how to thrive, not just survive, by nurturing your mental, physical, and spiritual health together. Hello everyone, I'm Lola. In today's episode, we're breaking down Healthline's guide to overcoming overthinking with science-backed tools. You'll learn how to spot automatic negative thoughts, ANTs, use CBT tricks to challenge them, and even diffuse from sticky mental loops with ACT techniques. Plus, why mindfulness and self-compassion are secret weapons against rumination. If you're ready to hit pause on overthinking, let's dive in. Ready? Let's begin.
All right, so you know that constant chatter that's always going on in your head. Sometimes it's like, hey, this is useful, and then other times it's just like, oh, man.
Yeah.
So you sent in this really interesting collection of articles and videos about, negativity and negative thinking.
Yeah.
And we kind of took a deep dive into all that stuff.
Yeah.
And our goal today is to just pull out all the really practical stuff. So those strategies that can actually help you kind of take charge of those thoughts that aren't so helpful. And hopefully, end up feeling a bit more empowered as a result.
Yeah, exactly.
So think of it like a toolkit for taming that inner critic that we all have.
Right. And, one thing that really stood out to me across all these different resources was this idea of ANTs.
ANTs.
Automatic negative thoughts.
Yeah.
And actually one of the videos had this really great way of describing them. And they said, it's like, those salespeople who just won't quit.
Right.
They just keep coming back and they're trying to sell you something you don't need.
It's so true. And it's they're really good at their job. It's wow, they're very persistent.
Yeah.
And that's totally what it feels like.
It is.
When you have these ANTs, because it's they just pop up and it's so involuntary and they're so habitual. And it's no matter what you do, they just seem to zoom in on the negative and then they just blow everything out of proportion.
Right. Yeah. And they're not just these fleeting little things that you can just brush aside. They can really shape the way that you see things.
Oh, absolutely.
And, they bring on all these intense negative emotions like anxiety or sadness.
Yeah.
And they can even make you start doing things that are really unhelpful. Maybe you start avoiding new opportunities.
Not totally, yeah.
Or you withdraw from your friends and family.
Yeah.
So it's they can really impact your behavior in a negative way.
It's almost like they're running the show. And you're just kind of along for the ride.
Yeah, and here's the thing, and this is a point that comes up again and again in the material you sent.
Yeah.
Just because you have a thought doesn't make it true.
Right.
It might feel really real in the moment,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean it's actually a fact.
So just because I'm thinking it,
Yeah.
let's make it so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your brain is this thought factory that's just constantly churning out thoughts, all day long.
It's a 24-hour, production line of thoughts.
It doesn't stop. So, being able to realize that your thoughts aren't always the ultimate truth.
Right.
That's a really powerful first step in kind of taking back control.
Okay, so it's your brain's offering you all these suggestions, but you don't have to accept every single one.
Exactly. You get to choose.
You get to decide okay, is this a helpful thought or is this not a helpful thought?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so then how do we even start to wrangle these thoughts and
right.
get handle on all these mental salespeople that are constantly trying to, sell us stuff?
Yeah. Well, a big part of it is just being able to recognize those negative thought patterns when they're happening.
Okay.
Right. So one of the articles talked about should statements.
Oh, yeah. Those are a good one.
Yeah. All those rules that we kind of put on ourselves.
Oh, yeah, totally.
I should be more productive.
I should work out every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I should be happy all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And I think on the surface, it seems like a positive thing, right?
Yeah.
You want to achieve more.
Totally.
You want to be a better person.
Right. You want to feel good.
But the problem is that word should. It just puts so much pressure on you.
It does.
And it can really make you feel guilty and start criticizing yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're not living up to all those shoulds.
So it's this really rigid standard.
Yeah.
And it's often impossible.
Right.
And then because it's impossible to meet it, it's like you said, it leads to all this self-criticism and negativity.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what the article suggested was instead of saying should, try saying something like, I will aim to, or I will try to.
Okay.
So instead of saying, I should go to the gym every day,
Yeah.
you could say, I will aim to go to the gym a few times a week.
Right.
Or, I will try my best to go to the gym every day.
Right.
And it's just like a subtle shift in language.
Yeah.
But it makes a huge difference.
It takes the pressure off.
Yeah, it takes the pressure off.
It introduces, like you said, a little more flexibility
Exactly.
and kindness toward yourself.
Yeah.
So it's like going from this like demand to more like an intention.
Exactly.
And another thing about those should statements is it's kind of like they're masking something else.
Yeah, what do you mean?
It's almost like they're masking unmet expectations.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's like, I should be further along in my career,
Right.
or I should be married by now.
Right.
But it's like, okay, well, why should you?
Yeah.
Who's like,
Exactly. And who are you comparing yourself to?
right. So it's like those shoulds are really good at like making you feel inadequate
Mm-hmm.
because they're based on all these comparisons and expectations.
Yeah. Well,
Okay, so we talked about should statements, and then another source we looked at talked about ANTs, which,
yeah.
we touched on.
Automatic negative thoughts. Yeah.
And it's like, those are the brain's like first responders
Yes.
to any like strong feeling that you have.
Yeah, like the immediate thought that pops into your head when you're feeling,
Like something happens and you're like,
Yeah, exactly.
that's the first thing I think.
It's like your brain's go-to response.
Right.
Yeah.
And the video said that these ANTs are often like learned patterns or habits
Right.
that have just been like reinforced over time.
Yeah, and a lot of times they kind of revolve around these core themes of danger or fear,
Okay.
like it's your brain trying to protect you.
Right, but it's not always a helpful
Right, exactly.
kind of
See,
self-protection.
Yeah, it's like an overprotective parent.
Right. Okay. And they also said because these patterns might have been going on for years, it can be hard to actually become aware of them.
Yeah, it's like trying to hear the hum of your refrigerator.
Right.
It's always there, but you don't really notice it until you really stop and listen.
Right. It's like that background noise.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So how do we, bring these to light?
Yeah.
Like, how do we figure out what our ANTs actually are?
Well, one of the articles had this really cool technique they called a thought record.
A thought record.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that?
I think so. Can you kind of break it down? Like, what is that and how does it work?
Yeah, so it's basically like a structured way to look at a specific situation
Okay.
and like all the thoughts and feelings that you had in that moment.
Okay.
So the first step is just to describe the situation
Okay.
as objectively as possible.
Like, factually?
Yeah, just the facts.
Okay.
So, who was involved,
Right.
what happened, where were you, and when did it happen?
Okay.
Just like the basic details.
All right. So it's like setting the scene
Right, exactly.
for the thought record.
Yeah.
Okay. What's next?
Okay, so then the next step is to identify your mood
Okay.
in that situation. So what was the main emotion that you were feeling?
All right. So name it.
Yeah, just one word.
Like anxious or happy or sad.
Exactly. And then rate the intensity of that emotion on a scale of like 0 to 100.
Oh, okay. So how intense was that feeling?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes, we might think we're feeling something really strongly,
Right.
but then when we actually like rate it,
You realize, oh, it wasn't that bad.
yeah, maybe it was only like a 60.
Okay. Okay. So we've got the scene, we've got the mood, and then,
And then the last step is to write down all the automatic thoughts that came up for you in that moment.
okay. So now we're getting to the ANTs.
Exactly. So like, what were you thinking,
Right.
Even if it seems kind of silly or irrational now.
Oh, yeah. Those are usually the ones that are like the loudest.
Exactly.
So it could be something like, I'm going to make a fool of myself.
Yeah, or like, everyone's judging me.
Right. Or I'm going to get fired.
Right, exactly.
So write down all those thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the benefit of doing this?
Well, it's like, you write those thoughts down, it kind of brings them out into the open,
Okay.
makes them less scary and less powerful.
So it's like taking away their power
Exactly.
because you're like shining a light on them.
Mm.
Okay. That makes sense. And, going back to that feeling of being overwhelmed by negative thoughts,
Yeah.
one of the articles also mentioned that sometimes just breaking down a situation into like smaller, more manageable tasks can help shift your mindset.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
So it's like instead of looking at the whole huge overwhelming thing, it's like, okay,
Right.
what's one little step I can take right now?
Yeah, break it down into bite-sized pieces. So
Exactly.
you don't feel so overwhelmed.
Right.
Yeah, and it gives you a sense of progress.
And it's kind of like taking back some of that control,
Exactly.
where it's like, instead of the thoughts controlling you, you're like, okay, I'm going to control what I do next. Yeah, that's a good one. And then we came across this other article, and it was almost like a catalog
Oh, yeah.
of all the different ways that our minds can get stuck in these negative patterns.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
It was so interesting. And I feel like so many people are going to recognize themselves in these descriptions.
Right.
So let's go through a few of these because I think it's really helpful to be able to label these things.
Yeah, totally.
So the first one was catastrophizing.
Yeah.
So what is catastrophizing?
Basically, it's when you take like a small problem
Okay.
and you just immediately jump to the worst case scenario.
Like the worst possible thing that could happen.
Exactly. Like, you spill a little coffee on your shirt.
Right.
And then you're like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired and I'm going to lose my house.
Yeah.
It's that kind of like extreme thinking.
It's like that snowball effect where it just gets bigger and bigger.
It just spirals out of control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to do.
It is.
But once you can name it,
Right.
you can start to question it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, is this really going to happen?
What's the likelihood?
Yeah, what's the evidence?
Okay. And then there was personalizing.
Yes.
So tell me about that one.
So personalizing is when you automatically blame yourself for things,
Oh, yeah.
even when it's not really your fault.
Like you take on too much responsibility
Exactly.
for something that happened.
Yeah, like let's say a group project goes badly
Right.
and you automatically think, oh, it's all my fault.
I messed it up for everyone.
Yeah.
Even though it was a group project.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
There were other people involved.
Right.
And it might not have been entirely your fault or even your fault at all,
Right.
but you just automatically take on all the blame.
Yeah. And I think that one's really common for people who are like,
Yeah.
people pleasers.
Yeah, definitely.
Or, they just have a tendency to be really hard on themselves. Okay. And then there's overgeneralization.
Yes.
Which is and you take one negative event and then you just make it this like
Yeah.
big generalization about your whole life.
Yeah, you turn it into a rule
A rule.
about yourself or about the
Yeah.
world.
Okay.
So like, let's say you go on a date
Okay.
and it doesn't go well.
Right.
And then you think, oh, I'm just undateable.
I'm never going to find anyone.
Yeah, I'm always going to be alone.
Right.
And it's like, one bad date does not mean that you're going to be single forever.
Right. It's just one data point.
Right, exactly.
But overgeneralization is taking that one data point and then making it this like
Yeah.
huge overarching rule for your life.
And it's usually based on these words like always and never.
Always and never.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good thing to watch out for.
Yeah.
If you catch yourself saying those words,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably a sign that you might be overgeneralizing.
Right.
Okay, what about filtering?
Oh, filtering. That's a sneaky one.
What is that?
So it's basically like you have these mental blinders on
Okay.
and you're only focusing on the negative
Okay.
and you're completely ignoring all the good stuff.
Blocking it out.
Yeah.
So it's like you had a day where, lots of good things happened, but then one bad thing happened and you're like, ugh, this day was awful.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're only focusing on that one bad
Yeah,
thing.
you're filtering out all the positive.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then polarizing?
Yes, this one's classic.
So what is polarizing or black and white thinking?
It's basically when you see everything in extremes.
Okay.
So it's like either you're a success
Right.
or you're a failure.
There's no middle ground.
No middle ground, no shades of gray.
So it's like if I don't get this promotion,
Yeah,
then I'm a complete loser.
exactly. And it's like, well, maybe you didn't get the promotion this time,
Right.
but that doesn't mean you're a loser.
There's a lot of space in between being a complete success and a total failure.
Right. And there's so much that you can learn from that experience.
Right.
Okay. Maybe there are some things that you can improve on for next time.
Right. It's all about learning
Yeah,
and growing.
exactly.
Okay. Mind reading.
Ah, yes. Everyone's favorite.
I feel like this is a really common one.
It is.
What is mind reading?
So mind reading is when you think you know what other people are thinking,
Okay.
but you don't actually have any evidence.
Right. It's just an assumption.
Right. It's just an assumption.
Okay.
So, someone walks by and they don't say hi,
Right.
and you automatically think, oh, they must be mad at me.
They hate me.
Yeah, they're thinking bad thoughts about me,
Right.
but you don't actually know that.
Right. Maybe they were just busy and
Yeah.
distracted, or maybe they just didn't see you.
Yeah, maybe they had their headphones in.
Right. Exactly.
There could be a million reasons.
But mind reading is jumping to that conclusion.
Yeah, and it's usually a negative conclusion.
Right. And it creates so much unnecessary anxiety.
It does.
And it can also damage relationships. Because if you start acting like that person's mad at you when they're not,
Right.
then it's going to create problems.
Right.
Okay. So then there's fortune telling.
Fortune telling, yeah.
This one's a little bit like catastrophizing,
Yeah, it is similar.
but it's kind of more about the future.
Yeah, it's about predicting the future
Okay.
and usually predicting negative outcomes.
And acting like it's a certainty.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, you might be about to give a presentation
Right.
and you think, oh, I'm going to mess this up.
It's going to be a disaster.
Yeah, I'm going to forget everything.
And then because you believe that, you're more likely to actually mess it up.
Exactly. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's important to question those predictions.
Yeah. And to remember that, the future is not set in stone.
Okay.
There are many different possibilities.
Okay. So then we've got should statements, which we already talked about.
Yes.
But I think it's worth repeating because they're so insidious.
They are. They're everywhere.
They really are. And they can really make you feel bad about yourself.
Yeah, because they're based on these like unrealistic expectations
Right.
that we often put on ourselves.
So it's like, okay, I should be more successful by now.
Yeah. I should be a better parent.
I should be thinner,
Yeah.
and it's just like this constant barrage of shoulds.
And it never ends.
It never ends.
Yeah.
So it's really important to become aware of those shoulds
Yeah.
and try to replace them with something more compassionate and realistic. Okay. And then the last one was emotional reasoning.
Emotional reasoning.
And this one's kind of tricky.
It can be. Yeah. So emotional reasoning is basically when you believe that your feelings are facts.
Okay.
So if you feel anxious, you think that means there must be something to be anxious about. Or if you
Right.
feel sad, you think that means that your life is sad.
Right. So your feelings are dictating your reality.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And the problem with that is that feelings aren't always accurate. They can be influenced by a lot of different things.
Like hormones.
Yeah,
Right.
hormones or like, what you ate that day.
Lack of sleep.
Yeah, or just like your mood in general.
Right. So it's like, okay, just because I'm feeling this
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's actually true.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've gone through this whole list
Yeah,
of all these different ways that our minds can get stuck in negative patterns.
quite a list.
It is. And I think the good news is that once we start to recognize these patterns,
Right.
then we can actually start to do something about them.
Yeah, exactly. Awareness is the first step.
Awareness is key.
Yeah.
So what are some of the strategies that we can use to actually tackle these thoughts?
Well, one of the articles talked about the idea of mental shifts.
Mental shifts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's basically about consciously interrupting those negative thought patterns
Okay.
and choosing to focus on something else.
So it's like redirecting your attention.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the idea is that, these negative thought patterns are habits. And like any habit, you can break them with practice
Okay.
and with conscious effort.
So it's like training your brain
Yeah, it's like mental training.
to think differently.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then we also saw a lot about CBT.
CBT, yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how does CBT work?
So basically, CBT is about understanding the connection between your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors,
Okay.
and how they all influence each other.
Right.
So, if you're having a lot of negative thoughts,
Yeah.
that's going to affect how you feel,
Right.
and it's going to affect how you behave.
Right. So it's all connected.
It's all connected, yeah.
Okay.
And so CBT helps you to identify those negative thoughts
Okay.
and then challenge them
Okay.
and then replace them with more helpful thoughts.
Okay. So challenge and replace.
Exactly.
Okay.
So like, let's say you get some negative feedback at work
Okay.
and your immediate thought is, I'm a failure.
Right.
A CBT therapist would help you to kind of like examine that thought and say, okay, is that really true?
Is there evidence for that?
Yeah, what's the evidence?
Right.
Have you always failed at everything?
Have you never succeeded at anything?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And then they would help you to come up with a more balanced thought.
Okay.
Like, okay, maybe I didn't do this perfectly this time, but I've done well in the past and I can learn from this experience.
Right. So it's like finding the counter evidence
Exact.
to that negative thought.
Yeah.
Okay. And then some of the sources also talked about ACT,
ACT, yeah, acceptance and commitment therapy.
which seems to be a little bit different than CBT.
Yeah, it is a bit different.
Okay.
So a CBT, the focus is on like changing your thoughts,
Right.
right? But with ACT, it's more about accepting your thoughts.
Accepting them even if they're negative.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then committing to actions that are in line with your values.
Okay. So it's more about like how you respond to the thoughts.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
And ACT uses this idea of cognitive diffusion.
Cognitive diffusion.
Yeah, and it's basically about creating some distance between you and your thoughts.
Okay.
So like, how sometimes your thoughts can feel really loud and overwhelming? It's like they're right up in your face.
Okay.
But with cognitive diffusion, it's like you're kind of stepping back.
Okay.
and you're observing your thoughts from a distance.
Okay.
So it's like they're still there,
Yeah.
but they're not controlling you.
Okay.
It's kind of like, if you're watching a movie,
Okay.
you can get really caught up in the story,
Right.
but it's not real.
Right.
It's just a movie.
It's not happening to you.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so cognitive diffusion is kind of like that.
So it's like creating that separation
Yeah.
between you and your thoughts.
Mm.
Okay. And the video about ACT also gave some really practical techniques for doing that.
Oh, yeah, they did.
So what were some of the techniques?
Okay, so one of them was to just add the phrase, I'm having the thought that, before the negative thought.
Yeah.
So instead of saying, I'm going to fail,
Yeah.
you say, I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail.
Okay.
And it just kind of like creates a little bit of space
Right.
between you and the thought.
Okay.
And it reminds you that it's just a thought.
It's not a fact.
Right, exactly.
It's not a certainty.
Yeah. Okay, what else?
Another one was to name your negative thoughts.
Okay.
So you could give them like a silly name,
Like what?
like, the worry monster.
The worry monster.
Yeah. Or
Yeah, negative Nancy.
the negative Nancy.
Yeah.
And then the idea is that when you give it a name,
Yeah.
it takes away some of its power.
Right, because it kind of makes it seem less serious.
Right, because it's like, oh, it's just that silly worry monster again.
Exactly.
Okay.
Let's see, what else? Oh, another one was to thank your mind for the thought.
Thank your mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is kind of like a paradoxical technique,
Okay.
but it can be really helpful.
Okay.
So basically the idea is that you're not trying to get rid of the thought. You're just acknowledging it.
Okay.
And you're saying, thanks for sharing brain,
Okay.
but I don't need to believe this thought.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then they also talked about trying to say the thought in a funny voice
Oh, yeah.
or singing it.
Like a cartoon character.
Exactly.
And that, again, it's about making it less serious.
Exactly. Yeah. It kind of takes the power out of it.
Yeah.
And then a really basic one, but it can be really effective,
Uh-huh.
is just to repeat the thought over and over again.
Repeat it.
Yeah, just keep saying it.
Okay.
And eventually, it'll start to lose its meaning.
It's like it becomes just a word.
Yeah, it becomes just a sound.
It doesn't have that emotional charge anymore.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are all good ones. And then they also talked about using like a physical object
Oh, yeah, that's a cool one.
to represent the thought.
Yeah, so you could like write the thought down on a piece of paper and then crumple it up and throw it away.
Okay.
Or you could like use a little stone or something
Okay.
and hold on to it when you're believing the thought.
Okay.
And then when you're ready to let go of the thought, you put the stone down.
Okay, so it's like a physical representation of like letting go.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, that's a good one.
Yeah, and then another technique that came up in a different video was the six-pack exercise.
The six-pack exercise. Okay,
Yeah.
tell me more about that.
So this one is all about reframing.
Okay.
So it's basically about coming up with 6 different ways to look at the same situation.
Okay.
So like, let's say something happens that makes you feel really upset.
Right.
Instead of just dwelling on that one negative interpretation,
Okay.
you challenge yourself to come up with 5 other possible interpretations.
5 other ways of looking at it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the cool thing about this is that the other interpretations don't have to be positive.
They don't.
No, they don't have to be positive.
Okay.
They just have to be different.
Okay.
So, you could come up with some interpretations that are neutral, or even some that are still negative, but maybe in a different way.
Okay.
And the point is that by doing this, you're breaking out of that one rigid negative perspective,
Okay.
and you're opening your mind to other possibilities.
Right. And the video mentioned that there were 3 questions to kind of ask yourself
Yeah.
to help choose the most helpful reframe.
Right. So the first question is my story truthful?
Okay.
So it's about checking in with yourself and saying, okay, is this really what happened?
Right.
Or am I just making assumptions?
Am I distorting things?
Right.
Yeah.
The second question is my story kind?
Okay.
So, am I being unnecessarily harsh on myself?
Lots to think about. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.